Great, thanks Robin. Hi everyone, thanks for spending a summer day with us here, and hopefully the weather is nice where you're at. So today we're going to take a look at breaking down silos, teaching across the curriculum using project-based learning. And so we'll start off with what to expect from today's webinar. So why cross-curricular? Why teach it in that way, and why project-based learning? Give you a couple examples of authentic projects that connect to academic standards, and how to get started using PBL to teach across the content. Okay, so why? Why teach in this connected approach, and why PBL? Well, there are many reasons to teach integrated content. And so I just pulled out some of the main ideas that I wanted to highlight. And first, it's authentic. In life, we don't separate knowledge into different buckets. Now I'm going to balance the checkbook, so I'm going to do math. Or I'm going to go to the grocery store, and I have a budget. I need to read ingredients. I need portions. So we're using our knowledge of different areas as a whole, and we're not separating those out. So cross-curricular instruction is a more authentic way of learning the content. And because of that, it also promotes deeper learning. The students are making connections. They're able to apply outside of their content area as well. And it's connected knowledge. And I think about, back in the ancient times, and, it's about the 1800s, educators and learners were called polymaths, or a person of wide-ranging knowledge, like Socrates, Aristotle. They were not just mathematicians or writers, they were philosophers. Da Vinci, he was a painter, an engineer, a scientist, Galileo, Newton. So there are many examples of this connected knowledge. When we teach in a cross-curricular way, it actually is going to save time. Now, we know that teaching and changing and doing new projects and new lessons, there's going to be a lot of upfront work that we have to do. But instructional time is going to decrease because you're able to take those subjects, whether it's math and English or social studies and science, and bundle them together in a way that is authentic to the students. And lastly, we're going to be promoting those non-cognitive skills that are so, as we know, are so important to being successful. And that is critical thinking and creative thinking as well. So those are some of the main reasons that teaching in this integrative approach is important. But if you think about project-based learning as a way to do that, but why do we choose project-based learning? Well, the screen doesn't change because you're really hitting those same ideas, because you are teaching across the content when you're starting with a compelling question and then connecting your content to it. But I wanted to add a few things. In project-based learning, the students are doing a lot more iterative thinking. They're solving problems, creating solutions, they're collaborating, but they're also giving each other feedback. They're acting on that feedback, and they're iterating, and then eventually sharing that with that authentic audience. Also, incredibly engaging to teach that way. The students are working with an authentic audience. They are working on projects that make their world a better place. And research has shown that students who are engaged are going to do better. And then students are also going to be growing in their empathy. Because these projects are set in a way that they're making a change in their world, whether it's the world in the classroom, in the school, in the community, or even in the broader world, they're going to be making a difference. And that's also going to get them engaged and to want to do good. So we've created this project-based learning framework. I want to highlight a little bit of that and then take you through two specific projects and how we connected that content to it, and hopefully you can take some ideas from that and make that your own. So in all of our projects, we start with why. That is that hook, that compelling question. And then the students think it through. They're exploring, they're discovering, they're researching, they're getting all that knowledge they need to create a solution or a product to answer that question. And then we give them time to fix it up, to iterate on that, to make it better. And then finally, they're presenting to a real audience and sharing your awesome. And so if we focus on that cross-curricular piece of that framework, I'm going to take you through, again, two projects I can kind of see how we connected the content to it. So the first one is a 4th grade project called Prevent the Spread. And now I know I say 4th grade, but really the project idea could be moved up in the grades, or you could move it down as you see appropriate for your students. But the content that we connected to it, we connected to 4th grade content standards. So in this project, the students collect germs from common surfaces. You know, they're all over the doorknobs, their desks, their chairs, any place in the classroom. They're going to collect germs, and they're going to test the effectiveness of different disinfectants. And from that learning, they're going to create a PSA, a public service announcement for their school. All the while, they're learning about germs, hearing from health professionals, and connecting that content that you need to teach, all while making the world a better place. So if we take a look at that 5-step process in our project, these are the different lessons that the students are engaged in. So the first, they play this game called the glitter games, and the glitter represents the germs, and they're demonstrating how germs can spread. So that's that engaging hook. And then they start launching into the investigation. They are swabbing different surfaces around the classroom. Then they put hand sanitizer or different disinfectants on those different surfaces, and they swab again. And so really what they're doing is they're testing the effectiveness of the different hand sanitizers on bacterial growth. And then they learn about germs. What are germs? How do they spread? How can we prevent them? And then bringing in those industry experts, those healthcare professionals, to help them get that knowledge they need to create their PSA. And then they complete that investigation. They analyze their data, they construct explanations, and they can use that information in their planning of their PSA. In the work it out piece, they learn what a PSA is. What are the characteristics of an effective PSA? And then they begin the writing process. And again, they're collaborating. They're working together on this the entire time. And then they fix it up. They make those changes. They iterate. And then they share their awesome, whether it's to another class or to their principal or the entire school or the community. And you can see in those red boxes there, those are the different content areas that are connected in this project. So we're going to take a look at those a little bit more closely. You can see exactly how we made those connections. So if you see in lesson 3, the students are learning about germs. Well, when they're learning about germs, we can tie in social studies, evolving perspectives over time. So the students are going to be watching a video about the history of germs, and this is a good opportunity to bring in these changing perspectives, how as we begin to understand more and more about the world around us, our perspectives change. So as we learn more and more about germs through history, we understand that, hey, hand washing is a really good way to prevent the spread of germs. But back hundreds and hundreds of years ago, that wasn't the case. And then having those types of discussions and have the students come up with other examples, like DDT that was used in pesticides, or CFCs that were used in aerosol spray cans, and how we know now more about those and how harmful they are, and that's changed our perspective. Another opportunity to bring in content connections is in when their students are writing their PSAs. English language arts, the planning, revising, and editing. They're pre-writing, they're brainstorming ideas, making a rough draft, and then teaching revision and editing. Using a checklist will help the students do that. So that's a really great tie into ELA. In math, we use the real-life area. So when the students are analyzing their data from their bacterial growth experiments, they're going to have to figure out, okay, what is that area of bacterial growth on that Petri dish? So they use grid paper to approximate the areas of bacterial growth, hitting that standard of real-life area. Now, although this project is a little bit more heavy in science, I wanted to pull out the standard of multiple solutions, that 4th grade standard, because it's really talking about what we want the students to talk about is multiple solutions to different ways that we can be harmed by nature. So in this project, we're talking about germs and how they can be harmful and the solutions we can to prevent that. But what are some other ways that we can be harmed by nature? So maybe you talk about sunburns or natural disasters and they have the students come up with multiple solutions to help solve those problems. And then social and emotional learning. We use the CASEL standards for that, and we focused on responsible decision-making and social awareness. And this is a great opportunity to talk about ethics. And there's a video that we include about vaccinations and how the idea of vaccines was discovered, and talk about that controversy that surrounded that, and the morality of the right and wrong, and have really good discussions about that in this project. So that is the Prevent the Spread project. Again, it's 4th grade, and you can see here some images of students engaging in that project. On the left, you can see there's students sharing their PSAs, and we have students that did this in a video form as well, so there's a lot of different forms and choices in this. In the middle, you see them analyzing their Petri dishes, so this is where they're constructing their explanations to use for their PSAs. And the one on the far right is the glitter games, where the students are using the glitter to help them understand how germs can spread. So what about you? What other content connections can you make? Think about your content and the grade level you teach. Are there any other connections that you see fitting into this Prevent the Spread project? I'll give you a minute or so to answer that question, and we'll move on to the next example. Great, thanks Heather. Yeah, absolutely. Art can be tied into this. You can think about PE, a lot of different areas that you could possibly think about how to connect to this project. So we'll leave that chat box open there, so if you want to keep adding some ideas, please go ahead and do that. And again, this is recorded, so if there's some ideas that you want to share and you don't quite catch them now, this will be sent to you as well. So keep that conversation going. Yes, science, social studies, technology, absolutely, absolutely. This lends itself also very well to a STEAM lesson, for sure. Okay, thank you. All right, so the second project I'm going to share with you is Lend a Hand. Now, the last project was a little bit more science-focused. This one is more general, and we have it linked to 5th grade standards, but again, I would challenge that this can be brought up or brought down depending upon the level of your students and tied to your appropriate standards. So in this project, students are learning about micro-lending. And this is an idea that won Mohammed Yunus a Nobel Prize in 2006, where just a little bit of money or help to an entrepreneur in a developing country can go such a long way in helping that person change their world and change the world around them. And so students learn about micro-lending, and then they raise and lend money to this entrepreneur to help change the world, all the while learning that content that you need to teach. And again, I didn't mention this before, but in that download box that you see on your screen, the project overviews for these are there. So please feel free to take those, share them, make them your own. But those are there for you, so you can look at them while we're going along too. So here's the compelling question. Can a few cents revitalize a community? And so students start off with an engager, an engaging hook, literally, fished out of water. And students are given 8 gummy fish, and they put it in the center of this circle, and they have to stand such a distance back, and they have to catch as many fish as possible. And we give them the supplies and dollar amounts associated with that to try to engineer a tool to catch as many fish as they can. Well, the kicker is that they're going to realize very quickly that they are so short of being able to catch those fish. It's about $1 short that it ends up having to be. And so that springboards in them into this idea of micro-lending. And so once they've started to understand what micro-lending is and what it's about, they start thinking it through and exploring micro-lending stories, listening to different stories of micro-lending happening around the world. And from that, they solidify their understanding through puppet plays. So they create these scripts, and they put on these plays to help share their knowledge of micro-lending and its importance. And they share that to other classes in their school or possibly on social media. So once they've gotten all that information about micro-lending and have a sense of it, then they start working on, okay, how are we going to make the world a better place now with this information? Well, we want to support an entrepreneur. So they start researching in this website called Kiva, that's K-I-V-A. And in that website is these entrepreneurs around the world and what it is that they're asking for. And they decide, okay, which entrepreneur do we want to support? And then they decide to create the fundraiser for that. And they determine what's their fundraiser plan, and there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of negotiated meeting within groups and within the class. And they create a plan, and then they fix it up, and they deliver it, and they share their awesome. And that fundraiser then is something that they do either it's just within their school, their community, or maybe they take it a step further. And you can see those red boxes. Those are the content connections that are associated with this project. And so we're going to take a look at those. Again, this is a more general topic. It's not necessarily a science-specific or English or social studies, but we've connected all the content areas to this project, Making the World a Better Place. So if we take a look at English language arts here, the students are going to be introduced to academic vocabulary. That's a 5th grade standard. So capital goods, natural resources, microlending. So that's a great way to hit the standards by introducing that academic vocabulary and talking about it, and they're learning it in context. The same holds true for social studies. The variety of resources. Well, capital goods, natural resources, those are great ways to tie into that standard. And then have the students come up with examples from the Fish Out of Water game and the book that we introduced here, the Muhammad Yunus book, The 22 Cents. You can see that in the project overview. And then have them come up with additional types of resources that could be identified as either capital goods or natural resources. For math, when the students are on that Kiva website, it tells them how much that person needs, or how much they're asking for, and how much it has to go. So have the students create different numerical expressions to find out, well, how much has it received? And so by them creating these different mathematical expressions, they can discuss which expression is the clearest, which one makes the most sense to help them figure that out. In science, we're looking at matter and its properties. So when they play the Fish Out of Water game, they're given various materials at all different prices to try to construct something to help catch as many fish as possible. Well, this is a great opportunity to talk about what are those characteristics of these materials that we would need to be most successful. Like, for example, length, because they're a certain distance away, hardness, is it stickiness? What are those properties that are going to help their product, their creation, be most successful? And last, the social and emotional learning, taking a look at those relationship skills and social awareness. And in this project, we're having the students build upon each other's ideas. So a student has an idea for a fundraiser that they hand off to another student to build upon. Well, that's not always easy to hand off your work and have someone else add to it, especially if it's not exactly what you were hoping for, your expectation, and maybe you don't agree with it. So these are good opportunities to have those conversations with the students about how we respectfully provide feedback to each other and what happens if we don't agree with something someone had added to our work. Role-playing is a great way to do that as well. So those are the different content areas or the connections that we see within this micro-lending or lend-a-hand project. And so I want to put it back at you. What other content connections could you make from this project? And I just want to share with you, here's some pictures. You can see the kids playing the Fish Out of Water there. Looks like some of them are being kind of successful there as well. And then we have the kids researching on the Kiva website to identify who they want to fundraise for. And it looks like they're engineering here in that far picture a solution to that Fish Out of Water game. So turning back again to that question. So lend-a-hand, micro-lending, learning about that fundraising. We talked about some content connections. What other content connections can you make? think about what you teach and how could you see this fitting. Give you a minute or so to respond. All right, thanks, Heather. Yeah, at higher levels, if you're teaching, marketing, public relations, you're coming up with that fundraising campaign, absolutely. That's definitely a real-world, authentic skill, and it's something you can also, I'd argue, to bring into your elementary classrooms as well. For math, one thing I thought about is the Petri dish. When the students are analyzing the approximate area, you could also turn that into a fractions and do maybe equivalent fractions. So what fraction of the Petri dish does that bacteria take up, and what are equivalent fractions of that? So tying it into math that way. So again, we'll keep that chat box open, so if you think of anything or any questions you have, feel free to get those down in there. So how to get started, teaching across the content using project-based learning. Well, in everything new that we're trying, it's always good to start small. I shared with you projects where we had connected the 4 content areas and also SEL. And that's not going to happen overnight. But if you pick something, maybe it's something you already have that you can build upon, take a project you do, and what other content areas can you bring into that to teach in a more integrated way? And then plan early. The earlier that you can start thinking about and planning it, the easier it is for you, obviously, to implement that. So think about what's that compelling question that you want the students to answer. What is it that's going to engage them, it's going to hook them? And maybe you poll the class or you ask them and get their interest and help you to come up with that. Or maybe you already have a question that you can build off from. Once you've determined that question, then look at your content you need to teach. Instead of looking at all 4 content areas, just stick with 2. What are 2 standards that you could put together, bundle into this project? And talk with your colleagues. So if you talk with maybe the math teacher or the history teacher or maybe another specials teacher in your building, and see if they want to team up with you on this. Work together on that and use each other as you start building these types of experiences for your students. And last, as always, share your awesome. Share what you're doing with those around you, whether it's teachers, your principals, your community members, your social media, and finding those different ways to share what's going on in the classroom to outside the classroom wall. So remember, just keep finding those ways to be that blue apple teacher, the teacher who stands out. Your students will not forget you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to turn things over to Robin, and I hope to see you here next month.